The storm raged outside, the winds howling as if the very earth was trembling. Inside the sacred hut, the elder lay in his final moments, his breath ragged and weak. The villagers, gathered in solemn silence, watched as the elder's eyes fluttered open one last time. "The curse. It has returned," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Only the blood of the ancient kings can break it." His eyes locked with mine, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the weight of generations resting on my shoulders. The room fell still, the only sound, the crackling of the fire. Outside, the storm intensified, as if nature itself was reacting to the elder's passing. A shiver ran down my spine. Was it fate or something far darker? The elder's words echoed in my mind, his final breath carrying a message of doom. "You must rise, for they are coming." The morning after the elder's passing was eerily still. The storm had subsided, leaving behind an oppressive silence. I sat with Baba Jide, the oldest of the village elders, under the shade of a towering baobab tree. He had called for me, his face worn with sorrow and age. "The curse, Amina," he began, his voice grave. "It runs deeper than we realize. The bloodline you carry is tied to this land in ways even I do not fully understand. The storm, the death of Oluwaseun, these are but the beginning. Your destiny, though uncertain, is bound to an ancient prophecy." His eyes, dark as the night sky, held a mix of fear and urgency. I listened, my heart pounding. "But why me?" I asked. "Why is this curse mine to bear?" Baba Jide's gaze softened. "Because, my child, the kings of old called upon your ancestors to protect this land. Now, the time has come to reclaim that power." His words felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. The prophecy was now mine to unravel, whether I wanted it or not. As Baba Jide spoke of the prophecy, my mind swirled with questions, but one thing was clear. I was being thrust into a battle I wasn't prepared for. I had never been trained to lead or to wield the powers of my ancestors. But as Baba Jide continued, the weight of his words sank deeper into my soul. "The spirits of the land, Amina, they are not mere shadows. They are with you, and they have called you for this very moment." I could feel it now, a presence all around me, as if the very earth was alive, whispering my name. I had no choice but to accept the path laid before me. The storm had not been an accident. It was a harbinger of things to come. Baba Jide stood and handed me a small carved bone amulet. "This will guide you," he said. "The spirits will help you, but you must prove yourself worthy." My fingers closed around the amulet, a faint warmth radiating from it. I took a deep breath and nodded, understanding the gravity of the journey ahead. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The wind whispered through the trees, but it wasn't the wind that sent chills down my spine. I sat alone by the fire, trying to collect my thoughts, when I heard the soft footsteps approaching. It was Tariq, my cousin, a fierce warrior in the village. "You are not alone in this, Amina," he said, his voice low but full of conviction. "I'll protect you, no matter what." Tariq was always the one to stand by me, ever since we were children. But tonight, something in his eyes was different, darker. I could see the burden of the curse weighing on him too. He knelt beside me, his muscular frame casting a shadow over the fire. "But you must be prepared," he added, his voice steady. "The path ahead is treacherous, and the enemies we face are not of this world." I nodded, unsure if I was ready for what lay ahead, but knowing that I had no choice. The prophecy was no longer just a tale. It was real. As the night stretched on, Tariq and I remained by the fire, speaking of the ancient prophecy, but the world felt far away. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of the village, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. A shiver ran down my spine. Tariq's voice broke through my thoughts. "Amina, there's something you must know," he said, his voice suddenly heavy with an emotion I couldn't place. "The elders are not telling you everything." I turned to look at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" I asked. Tariq's gaze shifted away, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in his eyes. There are forces at play here, forces beyond the prophecy, forces that would destroy everything we hold dear. His words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. I didn't know what to make of it. Was he referring to the curse or something else? I had to know the truth, but I wasn't sure if Tariq could be trusted. The days since Oluwasuen's passing had been filled with unease. Amina could feel the weight of her new role growing heavier each day. Baba Jide's warning echoed in her mind. The curse was real, and now there was no escaping it. The enemy she would face was no longer just a myth. It was alive, lurking in the shadows. Rumors of a growing darkness reached the village, whispers of a former elder who had turned to a darker path. Amina knew that she could not face this threat alone. Tariq had sworn to protect her, but his loyalty was being tested as much as hers. There is no time for fear, Amina thought. I must face what is coming. The village was on edge, and with every passing day, the tension grew. Tariq, ever loyal, was already preparing for battle, gathering weapons and supplies. Amina watched him, knowing that this would be a fight like no other. The clash would not only be for the throne, it would be for the very soul of the land itself. It wasn't long before the storm arrived in full force. Amina had heard rumors about Kofi, a former elder who had fallen from grace. His ambition had twisted him, and he now sought to overthrow the very foundations of their traditions. Baba Jide had spoken of him once, warning of a time when he would return. Now that time was here. Amina had no choice but to confront this rising threat. As the sun set and the winds picked up, the sky seemed to darken in anticipation. Kofi was powerful, and his followers, drawn by his promises of a new order, were growing in number. We can't allow this, Amina muttered to herself. We must fight, or everything will be lost. Tariq had said nothing, but his posture spoke volumes. He would stand by her side as always. This battle would be fought not only with weapons, but with the strength of their people's beliefs. As night fell, Amina and Tariq stood in the heart of the village, surrounded by the elders. Baba Jide had called a council meeting to discuss their next steps. It was clear that the situation was becoming dire. Kofi had sent emissaries demanding the surrender of the village, and his forces were encroaching upon their lands. We cannot yield, Baba Jide said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of his years. To do so would be to abandon everything we stand for. Amina nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment. Her people were at risk, and the stakes had never been higher. We must fight for our ancestors, she declared, her voice ringing with certainty. Tariq placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. The elders were divided, some fearful of the inevitable battle, while others rallied behind Amina. It was clear that a choice had been made. The time for hesitation was over. The war for their future had begun. The next morning, Amina and Tariq led the village's warriors to the outskirts, preparing for the inevitable clash. Kofi and his followers had arrived at the village's borders, a sea of dark figures silhouetted against the dawn. Amina's heart raced, but she stood firm. This is our land, and we will not let it fall into the hands of someone who seeks to destroy it, she said, her voice strong. Tariq stood by her side, his sword drawn, eyes scanning the horizon. The warriors of the village gathered behind them, their expressions serious, ready for battle. Amina could feel the weight of her ancestors' eyes upon her, their spirits guiding her. As the wind picked up, carrying the smell of earth and rain, Kofi's forces began to advance. There was no turning back now. The time for words had passed. Amina's eyes met Tariq's, and they exchanged a silent understanding. The battle was about to begin. The battle was fierce, a clash of wills and spirits. Amina fought with all the strength she could summon, her movements swift and precise, her ancestors guiding each strike. Tariq was a force of nature, his sword cutting through the enemy ranks with deadly efficiency. The village warriors fought valiantly, but Kofi's forces were relentless. Amina could feel the pressure mounting as Kofi's dark magic began to take hold of the battlefield. The earth trembled, and the sky seemed to darken further. Amina knew that this was no ordinary battle. It was a test of her spirit, of her very identity. As Kofi's figure appeared on the battlefield, dark energy swirling around him, Amina's heart sank. This was the man who had once been a protector of the village, now corrupted by greed and power. "You will not win," Amina shouted, her voice carrying over the chaos. Kofi's dark gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. It was clear that the final confrontation had come. The night was still, heavy with the weight of destiny. Amina stood alone at the edge of the sacred grove, staring at the ancient altar before her. The symbols carved into the stone pulsed faintly, under the light of the moon. Baba Jide had spoken of this place, a site where the ancestors communed with those worthy enough to bear their knowledge. Amina had never fully understood its significance until now. "You must be ready," Baba Jide had told her. But how could she be ready when she had no idea what was truly at stake? She knelt before the altar, the air thick with magic, feeling a pull she couldn't resist. Suddenly a voice, soft yet powerful, resonated from the stones. "It is time." The world seemed to fall silent, the trees no longer swaying, the wind no longer blowing. A great energy surged through her, ancient and untamable. Amina closed her eyes, her heart racing. The spirits had called her, and now she had no choice but to answer. The weight of her ancestors' expectations pressed upon her shoulders. This was no longer just about saving her village, it was about reclaiming what had been lost to time. She rose slowly, filled with newfound power and purpose, knowing that the next phase of her journey had begun. As Amina stood before the altar, the ground beneath her seemed to shift. She felt the presence of her ancestors, their whispers in the air, urging her forward. The wind began to stir, but there was no breeze, only the feeling of something moving around her, invisible yet undeniable. Tariq had warned her about the dangers of embracing this ancient power, but Amina could not turn back. "What else can I do?" she had asked him earlier. The answer was always the same. There was no choice. The moment she had stepped into the path of the prophecy, there was no turning back. As the air grew thick with magic, she closed her eyes, focusing on the pulse of the earth beneath her. The spirits, long silent, had awoken. Her body tingled with a new energy, an energy that was not her own. It was as if the earth itself had chosen her to carry out its will. But with this power came responsibility. She knew that her enemies, Kofi and his growing army, were only a shadow of the true threat that loomed over them all. The land itself had chosen her to face something far greater. The following morning, Amina awoke with a sense of clarity. The visions from the night before were still fresh in her mind, though they were blurry and fragmented. Tariq approached, his face filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face for any signs of doubt. Amina nodded, her gaze distant. "I've seen it," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "The curse is not just a curse. It is a barrier, a lock, keeping something ancient from returning. We've been living under its shadow for generations." Tariq frowned, his expression darkening. "What are you saying?" he asked. Amina's hands clenched at her sides. "We must stop it from breaking free, Tariq. The spirits, the land, they've shown me what we're up against. It's more than just Kofi. We're dealing with something much darker." Tariq stepped back, his face showing a mix of fear and disbelief. He had known Amina was special, but this was more than he could have imagined. Amina took a deep breath, steeling herself. "The key to defeating this is within us. We have to unlock it, or it will consume everything." That night, Amina stood before the village elders once again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. The council had gathered to discuss the next steps, but Amina knew that time was running out. Kofi was closing in, and the spirits had shown her the truth. Kofi was merely a pawn in a much larger game. The ancient evil that had been sealed away centuries ago was stirring. Amina could feel it in her bones. "We cannot fight him as we are," Amina said, her voice firm. The elders exchanged uncertain glances, but Amina pressed on. "We must go to the temple, to the source of this power. The key to defeating the darkness lies there." Baba Jide shook his head. It is too dangerous, Amina. The temple is lost to time. But Amina knew what she had to do. It's the only way, she insisted. We have to awaken the power within the land itself. The elders were divided, but Amina knew that the decision was hers to make. With or without their blessing, she would set out for the temple. The fate of the village, and perhaps the world, depended on it. With the elders' blessing, albeit reluctantly, Amina and Tariq set out for the temple at dawn. The journey was perilous, the path filled with dangerous terrain and hidden threats. Amina led the way, her resolve unwavering. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, guiding her toward the temple. As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, Tariq kept watch, ever alert to the dangers surrounding them. After several days of travel, they reached the foot of the mountain where the temple was said to be hidden. Amina gazed up at the towering peak, the temple barely visible in the distance, shrouded by mist. "We are close," she whispered. "But the true test is yet to come." Tariq nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "I'll stay by your side, always." As the mist thickened, Amina felt the presence of something ancient watching them. The temple was not just a building, it was a living entity, and it was waiting for them. The temple loomed before Amina and Tariq, its ancient stone walls covered in moss and vines. The air was thick with a strange, unsettling energy. Amina could feel the pull of the temple, the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. "This is where it all ends," she whispered to herself, her heart pounding. Tariq stood beside her, his sword at the ready, though his expression was a mixture of concern and uncertainty. They had made it this far, but what lay inside was unknown. "We have to go in," Amina said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Tariq nodded, but his grip on his weapon tightened. "I'm with you, no matter what," he said. Together, they entered the temple, the door creaking loudly as it opened, revealing an interior cloaked in darkness. Amina could feel the power pulsing through the walls, as if the very air itself was charged with ancient magic. The battle that awaited them would not just be physical. It would test their spirits, their will, and their connection to the earth itself. Kofi had already begun to channel the dark forces, but Amina knew that she had something even more powerful within her. Something ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment. Inside the temple, the air was suffocating, thick with the smell of decay and the weight of forgotten history. Amina and Tariq moved cautiously, their steps echoing in the silence. The walls were adorned with ancient carvings, their meanings lost to time. But Amina felt the power of the place, felt the presence of something ancient and malevolent stirring in the depths. "We have to hurry," Amina whispered, her voice barely audible. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Tariq's hand tightened on his sword, but even his warrior instincts couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As they rounded a corner, they came upon a vast chamber, its floor covered in dark stone, and at the center, a swirling vortex of shadow. Kofi stood before it, his back to them. The dark energy radiated from him, filling the room with an unnatural chill. "You shouldn't have come," Kofi said, his voice cold and hollow. Amina stepped forward, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "You've sealed your fate, Kofi." The battle was about to begin, and the fate of everything rested on the outcome. The moment Amina spoke, the vortex swirled faster, dark energy crackling around it. Kofi turned to face them, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You cannot defeat me, Amina," he said, his voice echoing as if it came from all directions. "I have already won. The darkness has been set in motion, and you are too weak to stop it." Amina felt the weight of his words, but she refused to back down. She had seen the prophecy, felt the power of the earth, and knew that the only way forward was to confront this darkness head-on. "The curse ends now," she said, stepping forward, her voice full of determination. Kofi laughed darkly. "You think you have the power to stop me? You are just a puppet, a pawn in this game." The shadows around Kofi seemed to pulse with energy, growing stronger with each word. But Amina knew that Kofi's strength was a lie, built on the fear and suffering of others. She would not let him win. The spirits of her ancestors were with her, and she was ready to fight for them, for her people, for the land. The battle for the world's soul was about to begin. Amina and Kofi locked eyes, and in that moment, time seemed to slow. The battle was not just about physical strength, it was a war of wills, of spirits, of everything they had ever known. Amina felt the earth beneath her feet, felt the spirits of her ancestors rising within her. She called on their strength, their wisdom, and as her spear gleamed with the light of their power, she lunged forward. Kofi countered with dark energy, his hands crackling with raw magic. The clash between light and shadow shook the very foundation of the temple. Tariq stepped in, his sword slashing through the air to keep Kofi's dark forces at bay. The air was thick with the power of their struggle, and the walls of the temple seemed to groan under the force of their collision. Every strike from Amina and Kofi echoed like thunder, the ground trembling beneath their feet. But Amina knew that this was her moment, the culmination of everything she had learned, everything her ancestors had taught her. She had to end this now. With one final strike, Amina plunged her spear into Kofi's chest. The darkness surrounding him began to dissipate, and the swirling vortex in the center of the temple began to slow. Kofi gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief, as he fell to his knees. "This is impossible," he whispered. But Amina knew the truth. The darkness had no power over her anymore. The curse was broken, the land was free, and the spirits of her ancestors could rest. Tariq stepped forward, placing a hand on Amina's shoulder. They had done it. They had won. But as the temple began to crumble around them, Amina knew that this victory was only the beginning. The world would change, and they would have to adapt to the new age. But for now, the curse was broken, and the land was free. The aftermath of the battle left the temple in ruins, but Amina could feel the change in the air. The darkness that had once gripped the land was no more. She stood at the threshold of the temple's shattered door, the sun beginning to rise behind her. The villagers who had waited anxiously outside began to approach cautiously, eyes wide with wonder and fear. Amina turned to face them, her heart heavy but filled with hope. "It's over," she said softly. Tariq stood beside her, his face grim but proud. Together they had defeated the darkness, but the victory had come at a cost. The temple was no longer a place of power. It had become a symbol of the fight for their future. Amina could already see the transformation that had begun. The land, once stifled by the curse, now seemed to breathe freely again. The villagers approached, their faces filled with gratitude and awe. But Amina knew this was only the beginning. The land had been freed, but now it was time to rebuild, not just the village, but the very spirit of their people. They had been tested, but they had survived. The question now was, what kind of future would they create? As the village began to rebuild, Amina found herself in the heart of the community, working side by side with the people who had once feared her rise. The bond between the villagers and their leaders had been tested, but now there was a shared understanding. Baba Jide, ever the wise elder, had returned from the shadows, his voice a steadying presence. "You have done what was needed, Amina," he said, his voice soft yet proud. Amina had struggled with the burden of leadership, unsure of her place in a world where the old ways were fading. But now, as she stood alongside her people, she realized that her true role was not just as a leader, but as a unifier, a bridge between the old traditions and the new. "We have a long road ahead of us," Amina said, her voice strong. "But together, we will rebuild what was lost and forge a new future for our people." The villagers nodded, their faces filled with hope. The curse had been broken, but the real challenge was to make sure their world thrived again. Amina felt the weight of responsibility, but this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the start of something new, something stronger than the past. Weeks passed, and the village began to flourish once more. The once empty fields were now filled with crops, and the people who had once lived in fear were now working together to create something better. Amina walked through the village, her heart swelling with pride. The journey she had taken was more than just about defeating Kofi or breaking the curse. It had been about learning to live with the legacy of her ancestors and finding her place in a changing world. As she passed by the new homes and gardens, she saw the faces of the villagers, children playing, elders telling stories, and warriors training. It was a life that, just weeks ago, seemed impossible, but now, it was a reality. We've come so far, she thought, but there's still more to do. Her role as a leader was not over. It was just beginning. Amina knew that she would continue to guide the people, not just with the strength of her arms, but with the wisdom of her heart. The world had changed, and so had she. As the village grew stronger, so did Amina's understanding of her place within it. The memories of the battle, of the darkness they had overcome, never truly faded, but they no longer felt like a burden. Instead, they were a part of her, woven into the very fabric of her being. Tariq had become her closest ally, a steadfast companion who stood by her through everything. One evening, as they sat beneath the stars, Amina turned to him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You were right," she said quietly. "I was scared to lead, but I see now that it's not about strength alone. It's about the people. It's about unity." Tariq smiled back, his eyes softening. "You've always had the strength, Amina. You just had to find the courage to embrace it." Together they sat in silence, watching the stars above, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. As Amina stood at the edge of the village, watching the sun set behind the mountains, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The journey had been long and filled with struggle, but now, for the first time in a long while, she felt at home. "We've built something beautiful," she whispered to herself. The village was thriving, the curse had been broken, and the land was free. There would always be challenges ahead, but now, Amina knew that they would face them together. She had found her purpose, not in the title of leader, but in the people she protected and the land she loved. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Amina would never be alone again, and neither would her people. The peaceful days that followed were marked by a sense of rebuilding. Amina worked alongside her people, guiding them through the rebuilding of their homes and hearts. The bond between her and Tariq grew stronger as they became the pillars of their community. One morning, Amina stood overlooking the village, feeling the weight of the land's history pressing down on her. "We are healing," she whispered. Yet deep inside, she felt something stirring, a change on the horizon. It was a quiet warning, one that would soon come to pass. Days turned into weeks, and Amina's connection to the land deepened. One evening, as the village gathered around the central fire, she noticed Baba Jide watching her from across the flames. His gaze was intense, filled with unspoken knowledge. As she approached, he spoke quietly. "There is a time for peace, and then there is a time for war. Be ready, Amina." His words sent a chill down her spine. The war for their survival was not over. Something darker, something unseen, was looming. The days that followed were filled with preparations. Amina gathered the village's warriors, including Tariq, and began training them in defense, both physically and mentally. The threat was growing. Kofi's influence had spread further than they'd anticipated, and whispers of dark forces in the distance reached their ears. One evening, Amina stood before the warriors, her voice firm. "We stand together. No matter what comes, we will fight as one." The strength of the village was about to be tested once again. The battle drums echoed through the night, signaling that the time had come. Amina stood at the village's edge, looking out at the dark horizon where the first signs of Kofi's army appeared. They had come. Tariq stood beside her, his hand resting on his sword. "It's time," he said quietly. Amina nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The land they had fought for, the peace they had built, was now in danger once again. But, this time, Amina was ready. She would not let the darkness reclaim what they had fought so hard to restore. As Amina and her warriors prepared for the inevitable clash, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led her here. The battles, the losses, and the victories, they had all shaped her into the leader she was today. She had learned that strength wasn't just about fighting, it was about resilience, unity, and sacrifice. As the final preparations were made, Amina turned to Tariq. "We fight not just for today but for the future of our people," she said, her voice unwavering. The night before the battle, the weight of her ancestors' spirits was with her. Tomorrow, everything would change. The battle began at dawn, with the clash of steel ringing out through the valley. Amina led her warriors into the fray, her spear flashing in the sunlight. Kofi's forces were numerous, but they lacked the unity that Amina's people shared. As they fought, Amina could feel the weight of the land's power in her veins, the energy of the earth fueling every strike. But Kofi was no ordinary foe. He fought with dark magic, his eyes glowing with the power of the curse. "You cannot stop me, Amina," he sneered. "This land is mine." Amina's heart burned with the strength of her ancestors. "Not anymore," she replied, stepping forward to face him. The fight was intense. With every blow they struck against Kofi's forces, only pushing them back momentarily. Amina's warriors fought valiantly, but the true test lay ahead. Kofi's magic grew stronger with each passing moment, his power feeding off the land's despair. As the battle raged on, Amina realized that defeating Kofi would take more than just strength. It would take the courage to wield the power within her. The earth itself had given her the strength to fight, but it was up to her to use it. She gathered her energy, calling upon the spirits of her ancestors. "This is our land," she shouted, "and we will fight for it." In the heart of the battle, Amina finally faced Kofi one-on-one. The dark magic swirled around him, but Amina felt the earth beneath her feet, grounding her. "You cannot defeat me," Kofi growled, his power growing stronger with every word. Amina's heart was calm, despite the chaos around them. "I don't need to defeat you," she replied. "I only need to protect what is ours." With a swift movement, Amina thrust her spear forward, channeling the power of the earth itself into her strike. The land responded, and the force of her attack broke through Kofi's magic. The battle was almost over. With one final strike, Amina's spear pierced Kofi's chest, and the dark energy surrounding him began to fade. Kofi gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief, as the darkness that had consumed him dissipated. "It's over," Amina whispered, her voice filled with relief. Tariq approached, his sword lowered, his face a mixture of exhaustion and pride. The battle had been long, but it was over. The land was free once more. Amina knelt beside Kofi's fallen form, feeling the weight of what had been lost and gained. The darkness was gone, but the work of rebuilding had only just begun. As the sun rose over the battlefield, Amina felt the first true sense of peace in a long time. The war was over, and Kofi had been defeated. Tariq stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We did it," he said softly. Amina nodded, her heart still heavy, but now with hope. The land had been freed, but the journey ahead was just beginning. There would be rebuilding, healing, and growing. But now, they would do it together. "We've made it through the storm," Amina said quietly. "Now, we begin again."